Hi, everyone, and welcome to Love's Answer to Your Awakening. My name is Elizabeth Sabet, and I'm so happy that you're joining me today. I have a very special guest, and we're going to be talking about a practice called Coming to Peace by Isa Gucciardi. And so I am so excited to have her here with us today. As you know, for those of you that are getting my weekly love note, that we are talking about taking responsibility for becoming aware of the barriers within our own mind, those demons within ourselves, our dragons that keep us from receiving love so that we can be that beacon of love. And that is what this book is all about, and this practice of coming to peace. So I want to introduce you to Isa today by reading you the about author from her book, Coming to Peace. In the mid-90s, Isa began developing depth hypnosis as she entered into clinical practice. Her studies, both in academia and in the field of cultural and linguistic anthropology, comparative religion, and transpersonal psychology, formed the basis of her approach with clients and students. As the body of work that grew out of her clinical practice became larger, she began teaching others so that more people could benefit from the techniques she had developed. In order to accommodate the number of classes that grew out of this process, she co-founded the Foundation of the Sacred Stream, which is now a school for consciousness studies in Berkeley, California, serving hundreds of students each year. Isa teaches and speaks nationally and internationally, and she has published numerous articles, podcast episodes, and videos. And the book Return to the Great Mother, which I'm very excited we're going to be talking about soon. When the audiobook comes out, we're going to be bringing her back. She maintains a private practice with institutions and individuals in depth hypnosis and the Coming to Peace process. Isa speaks 5 languages and has lived in 11 countries. She is the mother of 2 children and lives with her partner in San Francisco. Welcome, Isa.
Thank you so much. I so appreciate being here.
Yes, thank you so much. So I am very interested about what inspired you to develop this beautiful process, this coming to peace process, and all of the influences that are involved in here. Would you be willing to share that with us today?
Sure, of course. The thing that inspired me to try to understand how to resolve conflict was conflict. So as a very young person, I lived in a in a family that was pretty much nothing but conflict. And I used to spend a lot of time outside, away from the family. And I spent a lot of time in nature. I lived in Hawaii when I was very young. And of course, the nature there is so welcoming, so embracing. And it really became my refuge. And the thing that I noticed about nature almost immediately, impossible to miss, I don't think I'm the first one to notice this, is that it's peaceful, and that there is spaciousness, and that there is beauty, and there is mutuality. And my first teachers about peace were the plants and the winds and the sea of Hawaii, and the animals, of course. And so, and a question that rose in me very early was, how can we bring this peace into the realm of humans? And because it was so clear that the 2 worlds were so different. And that question has stayed with me my whole life, and it has been the driving force. It's not so much the driving force, but the leading force, leading me into trying to understand how to bring peace into human affairs, how to resolve conflict. And as I kept this question in mind, as I started my formal studies in university, I thought, I want to find a culture that does bring the beauty and the peace of nature into the cultural constructs, because I had lived in many different cultures. I left Hawaii when I was almost 9 and moved to Mexico, and there I lived in a bicultural environment where we had the native. I lived on a ranch, and the ranch hands were native people, and the people who owned the ranch were not. And the difference between being with the native people in that kind of peaceful way that they had with the horses, and they were so kind to me, and taught me so many things, was really different than being with the people who were Spaniards and North Americans, and they weren't nice people. They were always in conflict. so and then I moved to the Middle East, where I went back and forth between 2 different environments. I lived in Saudi Arabia, but I went to boarding school in Lebanon. And those 2 cultures, although they are both Arabic speaking, and Lebanon is partly Muslim, although they were 2 Middle Eastern environments, they could not be more different. Saudi Arabia is a place of harshness and cruelty to animals, cruelty to women, and very rigid structures that, I lived in terror of being beaten whenever I went out into the souks, into the markets. If my wrist showed out from under my veil, that I could be beaten, and nobody
Really?
would do anything about it, and any woman could. And and that was really different than being in Lebanon, which was at the time called the Paris of the East. And so there we had, I didn't have one conversation where I wasn't speaking French, English, and Arabic all at the same time.
Wow.
Cultures were meeting, and I remember all the women coming from, in the large hotels, coming from Europe with their new fashions, and everyone was, just, mini skirts and lots of makeup, which was really different than the veils we were wearing
Yeah.
in Saudi Arabia. So I knew that there was some culture, that the cultures were not all the same. Like I knew
Right.
that there wasn't just my family, the family culture of mine. I knew it couldn't be the only one, right?
Right.
So I began studying, and I was going to try to find a culture that I thought really reflected peace, the peace of nature. And I found, the Hopi culture, some other indigenous cultures, but they were, it wasn't quite, the reflection of nature that I had dreamed of. And so I got a further degree in comparative religion, thinking maybe it's not a culture that I'm looking for, maybe it's a religion. And I settled on, again, indigenous spirituality, earth-based wisdom, shamanic practice, and Buddhism. And began to really practice both of these spiritual practices intensively, and really try to understand, in Buddhism, there's a very strong statement, which seems very simple, that others want to be happy as I do. Like, to remember that others want to be happy as I do. And I thought, yeah, right. Like, how do we remember that?
Right.
And then, of course, in my studies in anthropology, I got my first degree in linguistic and cultural anthropology. I did come into contact with these different ways of knowing, such as Ubuntu from the Southern African traditions, which is a method of, it's a lifestyle, it's a philosophy of wholeness, which does not observe any separation between people. And then I was very, very, very inspired by the Iroquois League, and studied it extensively, and really learned how much our current system of government is based on this method of consensus and mutuality and generosity, and the way in which decisions are made, the spaciousness in the communication, the hewing to spirit in trying to understand how to best bring forward change in the affairs of humans. And then, of course, in Hawaii, I had grown up very close to the traditions of Ho'oponopono, which is a method of conflict resolution that is used throughout the Pacific, that is primarily used in families and clans. And so, I was exposed to all of these ways of thinking as I entered into my studies for my doctorate. I decided to become a hypnotherapist at the same time. And in my hypnotherapy practice, I became immediately aware of the limitations of traditional suggestion hypnosis. And I was also studying transpersonal psychology, which, of course, as a way of knowing, as a field of study, observes and talks about the limitations of clinical psychology approaches to healing, because within transpersonal psychology, you have the idea that spirit does participate in the process of healing. And as Carl Jung, who is considered to be one of the godfathers of transpersonal psychology, said, no true healing can happen without the participation of spirit. So all of these things are going on as I'm sitting in my mind and in my spirit and in my heart. All of these different thoughts are informing me as I sat down to work with hypnotherapy with people. And I began to really, in the clinical setting, incorporate aspects of shamanic practice, such as soul retrieval or power retrieval, or soul part exchange, or incorporate Buddhist understandings about the nature of suffering, what it causes people to suffer. And so I began to use the teachings of the Four Noble Truths, which are teachings about suffering. What causes suffering is, according to the Four Noble Truths, our attachments, our aversions, and our misunderstandings, or our core beliefs that are out of kilter with reality. So, so I began applying all of my studies. And one of the things that happens in a therapeutic environment, as many of your listeners know, is that people bring in conflicts. And a lot, I would say, even though I began working primarily with individuals, a lot of what they were talking about was the conflicts they were having with other people. And then as I went further into my studies and as I developed my practice further, I, worked, depth hypnosis has two different levels to it. One, the internal process within the self, and the interrelational process between self and other. And as I began expanding into the interrelational processes, I started pulling from, the principles of the Iroquois League, of Ho'oponopono, and really began creating a system not unlike the social restorative justice processes in South Africa that were based on Ubuntu, and that they were used after apartheid. And I began really just drawing that methodology into the therapeutic environment, so that people are sitting, in a circle, not in any kind of hierarchy, where they are asked to connect with inner guidance in order to be able to guide the process. And we have a meditative process that helps facilitate that and helps reify that experience of internal support. And then we have everyone listening carefully to each other from a place of equality. One of the things that the coming to peace process does is it collapses hierarchies, so that in a lot of different situations you have, like for instance, in a conflict situation within a corporation, you have the boss who gets to call the shots, and then you have everybody else that has to hop to, right? Or in a family system, you have one of the parents or both of the parents calling the shots, and you have the kids who have to hop to, or one of the other, if one parent calling the shots, then maybe the other parent is hopping to too, you know? So the process of sitting in the circle, allowing everyone equal time to speak, allowing everyone to know that they need to be connected with spirit and speaking from their own truth and taking responsibility for their own experience, and then being asked to take a time out if they become abusive or if they become non-participatory, so that they can sit with their inner knowing and see how they might return. And then the other, a very, very, very important piece of breaking down the hierarchy is that only the person who is holding a talking stick or a talking stone can speak. So if you have a circle of people and someone says something you don't like, you don't get to go, you know, you have to hold your tongue, you have to hold your thoughts until the stick comes to you. And that in and of itself, you know, it doesn't allow the loudmouth to dominate, you know, as you often get in situations, right?
Right.
And so it is very effective. And the facilitator in a coming to peace process is actually taking a very back seat. The participants are the ones who are talking about what is important to them. At the beginning, everyone states their intention for being in, you know, in the circle, and it always has to do with their relationship to the conflict at hand. And then you go around and you have everyone state their response to everyone's intention. So that takes a lot of time, and it opens a lot of space. And the participants then begin to, in some ways, run the circle with just gentle facilitation from the coming to peace facilitator, pointing in particular directions. And people can, of course, decide to pass the stick or the stone once in a while. But if someone is refusing to participate, and often I have found it's the loudmouth who refuses to participate when they don't get to be the loudmouth,
I would imagine.
then they're asked to take a time out. And then everyone can say what they think about what's going on in a way that the loudmouth is not used to. And this is a way of really helping reduce conflict, because the hierarchies are collapsing and everyone has an equal say. There's mutual respect. Everyone is striving to stay close to the truth, and everyone is holding one another's experience with as much compassion as they can muster, understanding that the other wants to be happy just like they do. So these are some of the ways in which I was inspired, and the circumstances of my life that led me into developing the coming to peace process. And that is some of the ways in which the coming to peace process works, both in a therapeutic environment, in a family environment, in a corporate environment. You can apply these principles in a seamless way in almost any situation where there's conflict. And I have to say, from, you know, like, that makes me very happy because, you know, I feel like I have in some ways, you know, tried to answer that question that came to me when I was 3 years old, listening to the wind in Hawaii.
Amazing. What a question for a 3-year-old to be asking. Yeah. And I just have to say, if we would listen to our children, for those that don't know, I used to own 2 preschools for 10 years, and listening to children adults can become so wise. So the fact that, your beautiful, innocent, completely connected to spirit 3-year-old self was able to ask that question, and you as an adult kept listening to it, as also just a testament to your spirit. And I'm so glad that you listened to your young self and let that be relevant. But it sounds like you had some pretty extreme experiences as a child that would be very during your formative years, that would be obviously have shaped these experiences. To have to worry about those things as a child, right?
It's a big deal.
It's a very big deal. Yeah, it's a very big deal. So in reading this book, I was struck by the fact that, this can be used in a family unit with the properly trained practitioner. And I was going to ask, how do you, in these situations where the loudmouth, the one that's been in control of the unit, whatever unit where, you're dealing with, how does the facilitator keep them engaged?
Well, they don't get to participate if they don't engage.
Okay. Have you ever had anybody like get up and walk out?
Well, do they do that?
Yeah. Have you ever
I
had
have
anybody
had
just
people
get
do
up?
that. I have had
Yeah.
people do that. And then we just continue the circle, and the circle just focuses on everyone's response to that happening.
Nice.
And then everyone, and because usually there's no talking about that. Usually everyone goes to their corners and goes into their defensive postures to try to not get pounded.
Right. Right.
So by having everyone talk about it, and of course the loudmouth knows, right?
Yes.
and it's empowering. It's very empowering, and the system will shift. And as people become empowered and step into their own courage with the support of the tenets of coming to peace, they can then begin to establish a new type of culture within the unit that doesn't include the loudmouth's ideas, and they become more equal with everyone else. And if they want to participate, then they have to participate within the new set of values that is being established of mutuality, consensus, equality, truth, respect, honesty.
Beautiful. Really holding people's feet to the fire of self-honesty and what it's like to be them in the experience of the dynamic that you're working with. Creating a safe space for people to have the courage to use their voice where before they may not. So I'm hearing that once they have that opportunity to have a protected space for their voice, it gives them courage to continue to use it. Is that what you're seeing?
Yes, and especially when you have continued circles over time, continued coming to peace processes over time, so that it becomes stronger. I mean, there's always the fear, like in a corporate environment, if I tell the truth, I'm going to get fired.
Right.
We always ask for some kind of an agreement that there's going to be no negative repercussions coming out of anyone speaking the truth. We'll always ask for that environment, that agreement, either in the family system or in a community system, that no retribution, no vengeance. And if there is, then of course we're going to have a circle about that.
With lawyers. That's really beautiful. I'm thinking right now of a client of mine who is a truth teller and who has professionally experienced and personally experienced the consequences of being this truth teller. And sometimes they're very harsh, as we know. What happens to whistleblowers in corporate and governmental situations, and the scapegoating archetype that they kind of agree almost to take on, whether they recognize it or not. I'm wondering, the person that, like, because some person is coming to you, or some sacred stream practitioner coming to peace practitioner and asking for this for their group. Is there something that you do or coach people to be able to be strong and to carry strength through this process?
As the facilitator?
Well, as maybe the person who initiated calling
Oh.
in the facilitator, like, it seems to me like they might be taking on a scapegoat role or of some kind.
Well, we try not to let that happen.
Okay.
We try not to encourage that.
Right.
Because and that's kind of easy to do because they immediately become one and equal
Uh,
with everyone else.
I see. Yeah.
And so they're not doing all the talking. They're not saying what's all the problems. And the most that they may stand out may be that this person has requested that we have a discussion about this issue.
Mm-hmm.
That's
And
it.
that's
So they don't have to sacrifice themselves on the conflict.
beautiful. Because I know in some family situations where silence is the rule,
Mhm.
right? That if somebody speaks up, then that's it. They're ostracized or um, denigrated even further, because they spoke up and caused harm to the family unit. So just curious, but I guess, with everything, with the hierarchy dissolving and collapsing, then that person has some safety in that as well.
Right. And one thing that we have to all admit is that you cannot do the coming to peace process with someone who's dedicated to war.
Yeah.
So if there is a strong reaction within any system when the coming to peace process has taken place, they can have their reactions, but generally the people who no longer want to participate may have to do some separation out of the system.
Right.
And again, they need courage in order to change, and they need to understand their own internal responses to, for instance, being exiled or uh, being being spoken to harshly or considered to be, a person that is not good anymore.
Right.
And so then they would have to look at their own internal configurations in response to that and come to peace within themselves
Yeah.
in order not to fall into some kind of a victim scapegoat kind of archetype over time, so
Mhm.
that they can find wholeness within themselves and support the truth within themselves and have all of the parts of themselves support that truth no matter what is going on externally, so they
Right.
don't become victims of people who are dedicated to war.
Beautiful. So before I let you go, I want to talk about using this process with somebody with those different parts of themselves, right? So this also works not just within a unit of people, but within the unit of yourself, with your parts of yourself. Can you just take a moment to describe how you do that process?
Well, so let's talk about, so here we're talking about someone who's a truth teller who wants to make a change in a negative or an unpleasant, an unwholesome environment. So they call a coming to peace process. There's a lot of reactivity. People are upset. They wonder, did I do the right thing, right? And so they're left internally feeling, oh, maybe I did the wrong thing, and yet feeling, well, I can't live in that environment, but I did the wrong thing, but we can't live in that environment, right? So then you have two parts coming up within the person, right? The
Right.
part that wants to create change and the part that feels that they might do something wrong or that they have done something wrong in creating change.
Mhm.
So then what we do is we work in an altered state of awareness where we again connect with inner guidance
Right.
and help the person move into a deeper way of knowing beyond just the conscious mind ways of knowing, so that we help them with the process of inner coming to peace to tease out and reify those two parts. So we try to get an image of the part that wants change and the part that is afraid of making change. So then they have two parts. So it's almost like having two reified aspects of the self very clear. So it's not just that idea of like, I did something wrong. Did I do something wrong? No, you did something right. No, you did something wrong. Or they're not caught in that,
Yeah.
like that amorphous place of being kind of churned up and confused
Right.
by their actions. But here, no, we have very clearly defined, and the person defines the two positions, and then we reify them in the altered state, and then we have a conversation, a same exact way that we do in external coming to peace. Both parts have an equal voice. Both parts need to take personal responsibility. Both parts seek mutuality. Both parts seek honesty. And they have a conversation back and forth until they can get to an agreement about the best way to deal with the situation that's coming forward in an empowered way. And they seek guidance from that part of themselves that is acting as a guide in the process.
Beautiful.
And it's very empowering, very whole making.
That's so beautiful. Thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
I love the full circle aspect of the coming to peace practice, that it embodies all the parts of the whole, even within the individual.
Yes. Seeks wholeness all times.
Wholeness at all times. It's so beautiful. Thank you, Isa. I could talk to you all day, and I am going to bring you back. We've got so much to talk about. Your work touches so many facets of human experience. And so I'm really looking forward to having you on. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me, and many blessings in your work.
Thank you. And if anybody wants to contact Isa and they're interested in her work, you can look at sacredstream.org. You can also go to isagucciardi.org, and we'll have all of this information in the description and those links. Her email address is isa@sacredstream.org. That's isa@sacredstream.org. And also, you're going to find a discount code for the Coming to Peace practitioner training in June of 2022. And you're going to find a discount code in the description. So I really hope if we have any practitioners that are watching this, that you take the opportunity to come to this training and learn this beautiful technique. It will flow beautifully into your counseling practice, or if you're a transpersonal coach and you're working with people, a spiritual emergency therapist, a spiritual emergency coach, this would be a great way. And contact them about requirements and what it takes to join this course. Again, thank you, Isa, for joining us. I'm very, very grateful for you and your body of work. So many blessings to you. Thank you.